In this lesson, we are going to learn about the New England colonies, which would start with Massachusetts. In the previous lesson, we learned about Jamestown. Jamestown and Virginia were part of the southern colonies. Virginia, because it would be a proprietary colony based on profit with large plantations, which of course these large plantations formed because of the system of the headright method, which gave free land to those who could pay for their passage or their passage of others to America, would become the southern colony model. And even though Jamestown struggled at first, tobacco would make it profitable, and it would become a very successful English colony. It was the first English colony, and like all the other English colonies, there would be a scenario of self-government or a desire to self-govern arise in Jamestown. In Jamestown, the democratic government, which gave a voice to its citizens, was called the House of Burgesses. Here is the fort at Jamestown, as we already went through before, and much of this was reviewed. But once again, Jamestown was a proprietary colony for the purpose of making profit. And the democratic government in Jamestown would be called the House of Burgesses. In this lesson, we are going to learn about the New England colonies. The New England colonies would have several characteristics. One of those distinctive characteristics was it was founded as a haven for religious groups that were persecuted in England. These two religious groups were the ones that came over on the Mayflower. What group was that? Yes, it was the Pilgrims. However, the Pilgrims also had another name in England, and because they were going to separate from the Church of England, they were known as the Separatists. The other group that would settle in the area of the New England colonies, the area of modern-day Massachusetts, were called the Puritans. The Pilgrims would settle in this area here, and this area is what's known as the Plymouth colony. You may recall from your earlier teaching that they landed at Plymouth Rock, and that was where they started their first settlement. You may have learned that in elementary school before. But the colony of the Pilgrims was called the Plymouth colony. Now the Puritans, they settled further inland near modern-day Boston, and they would start up what's called the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So once again, both of these groups were persecuted in England for their refusal to follow the traditions and customs of the Church of England. And they decided to try to get permission to start up a new colony one where they could practice their religious beliefs freely in the Americas. They were granted this charter by the king and parliament, and they came to the Americas. So first we're going to talk about the Pilgrims. And the Pilgrims, we know the story. They struggled at first, but then the natives helped. And one of the natives that helped, you may know his name. His name was Squanto. And Squanto would teach the Pilgrims, who the Pilgrims were, let's see, how do we say this? They were non-violent at first. They were very passive people. That was the word I was looking for. They were passive, and the Native Americans desired to help them. And Squanto helped the Pilgrims by teaching them how to plant corn the Native American way. And the only way that corn would grow and other crops was to use the carcass of a fish as fertilizer. So you had to put parts of a fish in the hole to grow the crops to fertilize the soil. The Pilgrims had democracy, just like Jamestown had democracy in the form of the House of Burgesses. The Pilgrims in the Mayflower Compact, which was it's kind of like their constitution. They set up a system where the decisions would be made by groups. So the Pilgrims struggled at first, but the natives helped. They had democracy in the form of the Mayflower Compact, calling for group decisions. And ultimately, the Pilgrims fled England and came to the Americas because they were persecuted for their religious beliefs. From the PowerPoint, we can see the New England colonies was founded as a haven for religious groups persecuted in England. So different than the southern colonies that were founded as proprietary colonies for the purpose of profit. The separatists, the Pilgrims, landed at Plymouth in 1620, founded the Plymouth colony after signing the Mayflower Compact. The Mayflower Compact, which was like their constitution, believed the people form the government, and they decided that they would make decisions as a group. They struggled to survive at first, just as in Jamestown, but unlike Jamestown, they did not anger the natives, and the natives helped the Pilgrims. Here is the Plymouth colony where the Pilgrims or the separatists landed and started their colony. Here is the Mayflower Compact, along with those that signed it. And I visited Plymouth and could see a list of all the Pilgrims that were there. Here we can see a Pilgrim trying to probably introduce the natives in the area to their religion and the Bible. The New England colonies were also home to the Puritans. Now, the Puritans were like the Pilgrims in that they left England because they were persecuted because of their religious beliefs. However, they have some differences between they and the Pilgrims. The Puritans they founded their colony as sort of a profitable way to escape England. So they also planned on making money as well as leaving England because of their persecution. The Puritans had a joint stock company where investors were trying to make money off of the business venture of going to the Americas. The Puritans settled in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is very near modern Boston. Boston was a city that was started by the Puritans. And the Puritans had democracy because in their charter, all male church members could vote on the decisions of the group. Now, the Puritans, unlike the Pilgrims, came very prepared, and they did not struggle at all. They prospered immediately, and they also prospered from the land in which they lived and were granted a charter to. Now, the way in which they prospered is all centered around lumber. The Puritans would harvest the lumber of the great northern woods. Lumber being a very valuable commodity because even in Europe, they had started to over-harvest their trees. Now, with this lumber, which was sold outright for the creation of houses and other buildings, they also started another business. And the business what they started was shipbuilding. Now, the building of ships requires lumber, and the Puritans had a steady supply of it. So another way in which the Puritans made money was through the building of ships and the sale of ships. So if you were a Puritan living in New England, your job may have been to be a lumberjack or to a shipbuilder. Now, there's an additional way that the Puritans made money, and that is by trading. Trading requires ships, and the Puritans had ships to trade with. So, the Puritans prospered by harvesting the lumber, using some of that lumber to build ships, and then using those ships to engage in trade. Now, the Puritans also, and some societal characteristics of the Puritans, were they established schools, and to this day, the area in the Massachusetts Bay Area is very famous for its schools. In fact, probably the most famous college in America is there. What is that? Yes, Harvard is there. Well, Harvard has been around since the 1600s, and the Puritans believed in education and educating their children for a purpose that was largely centered around their primary beliefs. And the purpose they educated their children was so the children could read the Bible. So, education was very important in the Puritan community because they wanted their children to be able to read the Bible. And read that Bible, they better. And they had better follow the customs of the Puritans, or they would be kicked out or punished in some manner by the Puritan authorities. Because even though the Puritans left England because they were not allowed to practice, or they were persecuted for practicing a religion other than the Church of England's religion, if you did not follow the Puritans' beliefs, you were kicked out of the village. And if you were one who was not following the Puritans' strict religious beliefs, you were what was called a dissenter, and you would be forced to leave the village or city of the Puritans in which you live. Dissenters were exiled. So, to characterize the New England colonies overall, these colonies were founded for religious freedom, or they were founded as a haven for religious groups that were persecuted in England, and dissenters were kicked out. Now, the Puritans, of course, unlike the Pilgrims, prospered by harvesting the lumber of the great northern woods, building ships, and trading. Once again, the Pilgrims landed in the Plymouth colony, and they were called the Separatists. The Puritans landed and started the Massachusetts Bay colony. The Puritans landed about 10 years after the Pilgrims came to the Americas in the 1630s. They invested in their own joint stock company and brought their charter with them. Their charter, which was similar to the Mayflower Compact, established a democratic form of government that included town meetings and a general assembly. At these town meetings and general assemblies, all male church members could vote. Unlike the Native Americans who had women on their councils, women could not vote in Puritan New England. Here's a book that shows or was written about Puritanism and their democracy. Remember, democracy has been a feature in all of the colonies that we've talked about. In Virginia, it was what? Yes, it was the House of Burgesses. In the Plymouth colony of the Pilgrims, what was the democratic government? Yes, for the Pilgrims, it was the Mayflower Compact. And in Puritan New England, it was because of their charter. And once again, the Puritans of the Massachusetts Bay Colony prospered immediately. They prospered by harvesting the lumber, building ships, and engaging in trade throughout the colonies and across the oceans. They created schools so their children could read the Bible and establish religious conformity. However, if you were not doing exactly as the Puritans wanted and following their strict system of beliefs, you were exiled as a dissenter. Education being one of the legacies of the Puritans, Harvard University was established by the Puritans, part of that system of ensuring that their children could read in order to read the Bible. Here's a picture of a dissenter being drummed out of or kicked out of the village. This young lady must not have been following the strict system of Puritan beliefs, and she is being drummed out of the village. The Puritan families were large, so the population grew and spread to other areas. They passed along the religion and governing ideas. New Englanders as a whole enjoyed religious homogeneity, homo meaning one or the same, a thriving economy that was based on trade. Of course, the trade was because they could build ships, and they could build ships because of the great lumber supply they had, and a democratic government. This completes the lesson for today. So, once again, we've started to learn about the southern colonies, which were proprietary colonies based on profit, and we've also learned about the New England colonies, which were largely founded as havens for religious groups persecuted in England, but also they were a place where you really never had religious freedom. Religious dissenters were kicked out. Thank you for listening. I hope you did well.